What if I told you that the single most terrifying moment for a manipulator isn't when an empath fights back, but when they go completely silent? Stay with me, because what happens next doesn't just change the game. It rewrites the rules entirely. For years, the empath has absorbed pain, excused behavior, and carried the emotional weight of people who couldn't see their value. They've been giving endlessly, pouring life force into relationships that drain rather than nurture. Carl Jung observed the psyche like a pendulum. Push it too far in one direction, and it swings back with equal, unstoppable force. And nothing illustrates that principle more dramatically than the moment when an empath finally detaches. Most people misunderstand detachment. They think it's apathy, resignation, or coldness. But Jung's work revealed that detachment is something far deeper, an awakening. It is the exact moment when the empath stops giving away their energy to maintain illusions of harmony, stops trying to fix the unfixable, and stops performing emotional labor that others will never acknowledge. This silence isn't emptiness. It's power crystallized. In that quiet, there is a seismic shift. All the care, attention, and life force that once flowed outward now pivots inward, forming a reservoir of energy that the empath never had access to before. The room seems to hold its breath. The manipulator senses it immediately, though they cannot explain it. The usual methods of control, the subtle guilt, the emotional bait, they all fail, because the empath no longer participates in the game. Jung described this as the breaking point of the persona, a threshold where the mask that people wear for others can no longer be maintained. But for the empath, this isn't a collapse, it's a breakthrough into authenticity. The mask falls and what remains is unshakable inner truth. There's a peculiar beauty in this moment, almost magnetic in its intensity. The empath doesn't shout, they don't lash out, they don't even leave dramatically, they simply stop. And in that pause, the pendulum swings with a force that neither manipulator nor observer can fully comprehend. Energy shifts, balance is restored, and the empath steps into a power that has always been theirs but was obscured by endless giving. This is the first stage of transformation. A silence so profound it speaks louder than any argument, louder than any act of resistance, louder than any confrontation. Jung would have called it a quantum leap in psychological energy, a moment where the psyche asserts its right to equilibrium. And in that stillness, something remarkable occurs. The empath is no longer reachable by those who once dictated their emotional landscape. They have become untouchable, not through aggression, but through the quiet reclaiming of themselves. Detachment, Jung tells us, is not loss, it is liberation. The moment of detachment is only the beginning. What happens next is where the real power emerges. Carl Jung explained that human energy, psychological energy, not just physical or emotional, is finite. For years, the empath has been operating at a deficit, pouring their vitality into others while receiving little or nothing in return. Every apology that never came, every manipulation endured, every ounce of care given without reciprocation has created a hidden reservoir of tension and potential within them. When the empath finally detaches, all of that energy doesn't vanish. It returns, redirected, forming the foundation of a self that has been dormant, but never defeated. The empath doesn't explode in anger, nor do they collapse in sorrow. Instead, they step into a state Jung called conscious indifference, the power that arises when one has cared so deeply for so long that they can finally let go without resentment. It's a force born from clarity, not cruelty. The manipulator, accustomed to emotional responses, watches in disbelief as the empath no longer reacts to bait, no longer justifies their worth, no longer seeks external validation. This shift is devastating because it is not visible in the way most expect. There is no confrontation, no verbal sparring. There is only presence and quiet power, a subtle but unbreakable barrier that cannot be breached. In this state, the empath begins what Jung would describe as the conservation of psychological energy. The life force that once flowed outward in attempts to fix, to nurture, or to save now turns inward. The empath begins to rebuild themselves from within, reconstructing their inner world with the attention, love, and care that they were once too busy giving to others. Every thought, every intention, every small action is guided by a new principle, self-ownership. The empath becomes selective in their attention, deliberate in their care, and unwavering in their boundaries. Where before there was endless giving, now there is discernment. This is the moment when the manipulator realizes they have lost control, and nothing will bring it back. Jung would describe this as the withdrawal of projection. The empath no longer assumes goodness, growth, or conscience in others. They stop giving undeserved chances and start trusting their instincts. Words no longer sway them, only actions do. Patterns emerge with clarity, illusions dissolve. The empath sees reality as it truly is, and with that vision comes a freedom that is terrifying to those who thrived on deception and manipulation. Energy redirected becomes strength, clarity, and self-possession. What was once an empath's burden transforms into armor, a shield of inner power. And in this space, something beautiful happens. The empath begins to embody the self. Jung spoke of not fragmented, not defined by others' expectations, but whole, integrated, and unstoppable. This is the moment when everything solidifies, the final stage of transformation, where the empath emerges not just detached but fully integrated. Carl Jung described individuation as the highest form of psychological maturity, the process of becoming whole, of uniting all fragmented aspects of the self into a cohesive, authentic being. For the empath, detachment was the doorway. Now the return of energy, clarity, and boundaries becomes the path to true self-realization. They are no longer defined by how others treat them, no longer bound to the expectations, judgments, or manipulations of anyone outside themselves. The empath's power is quiet, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, yet unshakable. They don't seek revenge, and they don't need to prove their worth. Jung would recognize this as conscious self-possession, a state where the ego no longer overcompensates, where the persona no longer wears a mask to please others. Every interaction, every glance, every choice is now guided by authenticity. The manipulator, who once thrived on subtle control, suddenly faces a reality they cannot influence. The empath no longer participates in the game. The imbalance has been corrected. The energy that fueled manipulation has returned home and been transformed into resilience, self-respect, and life force. What is most striking is the empath's new relationship with the world. Jung observed that those who reach individuation are not untouched by pain, they are shaped by it. The empath carries the lessons of betrayal, exhaustion, and misplaced trust, but these are no longer chains, they are tools. Each memory of emotional labor, every unreciprocated effort, has been alchemized into wisdom. The empath now sees patterns with brutal clarity, discerns intentions with precision, and trusts instincts without hesitation. Projection has ceased and reality is met unflinchingly. They no longer expect apologies or validation, for their truth exists independently of others' acknowledgement. And then comes the ultimate paradox. The empath becomes invulnerable not through aggression, but through stillness. They do not fight because they have transcended the need to prove themselves. They do not hate because they understand the limits of others. They do not seek closure because they have achieved psychological completion. Jung called this the return of the self, the realization that fulfillment, wholeness, and power are internal, not external. In this state, silence is more potent than confrontation, observation more influential than persuasion, and being is more formidable than doing. The empath is free not because someone released them, but because they released themselves. They are complete not because the world changed, but because they changed. Their heart remains open yet selective. Their compassion remains deep yet directed wisely. Their strength remains gentle yet impenetrable. Carl Jung would recognize this as the ultimate integration.